The Afghan government reportedly keeps communications open with the Taliban as the United States searches for a strategy to end the 16-year-old war. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. January was a deadly month in Afghanistan with two major terrorist attacks claimed by the Taliban. On January 20th, militants stormed the Intercontinental Hotel, and a week later, a suicide bombing in the streets of Kabul left more than 130 people dead and hundreds more wounded. The United States responded with heavy airstrikes against the Taliban and other militants in northern Afghanistan, targeting training facilities in the Badakhshan province. U.S. President Donald Trump has rejected any negotiations with the militant group, but Afghan officials are reportedly keeping communications open. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani warned those responsible for the attacks, but also left the door open for reconciliation.
Those who are responsible for this tragedy and do not want peace, the door of peace is closed to them. Those who accept peace, they will witness that the nation will embrace them. But there is a clear difference. Our commitment to bringing peace does not mean we will sit quietly and won't retaliate.
There is much to discuss about Afghanistan's security, the Taliban, and the U.S. war. Joining us here in the studio is Omar Samad. He served as the Afghan ambassador to France and Canada and is currently the CEO of Silk Road Consulting. Also with us is Shuja Nawaz. He's a distinguished fellow of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council. And PJ Crowley served as the Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs and spokesman for the U.S. Department of State between 2009 and 2011. He's also the author of Red Line: American Foreign Policy in a Time of Fractured Politics and Failing States. Welcome to all of you to the show. Ambassador, let me start with you. 16 years of war, thousands of casualties, both military and civilian. Peace is very elusive in Afghanistan. Now the Taliban is saying that they're prepared to talk to anybody in the interests of peace in an open letter that they addressed to the U.S. people. What do you make of that?
Well, this is very new. I think it will take a bit of time to analyze it and look at why now and what is the purpose. There are quickly two scenarios that could be possible. One is they're under pressure. They're feeling the heat. The heat is rising. The pressure is mounting on them, and they need breathing space. And so this is a way for them to buy some time and to send some messages discussing maybe an avenue toward peace. The other is that they're serious, and there is a change in their policy, which also would indicate a change in Pakistan's policy as their main backer, and that has to be taken seriously if that is the case. So it would take a bit of time for us to figure out which of these two avenues this represents.
I'm wondering, are they under pressure? Because the U.S. Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction says half of Afghanistan is either under direct Taliban control or under their influence. There's also some estimates that put that figure at 70%.
I think that what you're seeing on the ground is a shifty situation from morning to night, night to next day, from one season to the other, from one district to the other, from one locality, one village to the other. That can shift. Yes, they seems to have some momentum, of course. There is a stalemate, but in the past month or so, we are seeing a change in this momentum. We're seeing the Taliban sort of on the back foot, somehow under pressure, mostly from aerial and special forces operations carried out across Afghanistan. I think that one of the reasons why they're resorting to soft target attacks, like the ones in Kabul or other cities where civilians are maimed, may have to do with the fact that they are not doing very well in the rural areas of Afghanistan, so they're focusing in the urban centers of the country.
PJ, what do you make of this latest outreach from the Taliban? They say they will talk to anyone in the interest of peace, but this is directed at the United States.
Well, I think a critical question is how authoritative, is that? The Taliban is not a monolithic movement. There are a lot of different moving parts to it. You know, the coalition has had some success in recent years in eliminating, you know, some level of Taliban leadership. You know, of course, it has been in transition for some time, you know, with the death that we discovered of Mullah Omar, you know, in Pakistan. And so a critical question to probe, you know, would be you know, whether the Taliban as a unified movement or a critical mass of the groups that make up the Taliban movement, you know, are actually prepared to sit down. And then we also have to test, you know, whether all of the interested parties, you know, in Afghanistan are prepared to support that negotiation and who would actually, you know, be at the table. We've had fits and starts of discussions with the Taliban in the past. At various times, the United States has been willing to engage. Pakistan has not. At various times, you know, Afghanistan was concerned that they were being cut out of this. You know, what role for China? What role for Iran? What role for Russia? So we understand at some point, you know, this is a critical element of a solution to the Pakistan, you know, struggle. But getting all of the pieces in place is highly complex.
But at this stage, PJ, it doesn't seem like the U.S. is interested in talking to the Taliban. This is what President Trump had to say. Let's watch this.
When we see what they're doing and the atrocities that they're committing and killing their own people, and those people are women and children, many, many women and children that are totally innocent, it is horrible. So there's no talking to the Taliban. We don't want to talk to the Taliban. We're going to finish what we have to finish. What nobody else has been able to finish, we're going to be able to do it.
So President Trump there appears to see a military solution to this.
Well, in fact, there's no military solution. That's the one thing we have learned, you know, over 16 years. You know, and in fact, you know, as we look backwards, you know, there was probably a lost opportunity to engage the Taliban, you know, in 2002 when the United States and NATO, you know, together with the nascent you know, Afghan government was in the strongest position, you know, on the ground. We lost that opportunity, and now, you know, on the one hand, I understand the politics behind that. You know, the Trump administration is working the same devil of detail, you know, with respect to North Korea. It's very difficult for the United States to sit down with adversaries, you know, and at various times we've delayed that conversation by saying, well, we need to make sure that we have the strongest possible position, you know, on the ground, you know, before we submit to negotiations. And as we've seen, as the ambassador has said, there's been such an ebb and flow that it's unlikely that any side is going to gain such an advantage on the ground that those conditions will ever be perfect. So, you know, but I think by the same token, you know, our strategy right now is not failure, you know, and so I think ultimately, if you step back and look at this, we've got to have some mechanism to begin, you know, negotiation under some auspices. Ultimately, this has to be a negotiation primarily between the Taliban and the Afghan government, right, you know, supported by all of the interested parties, including Pakistan, including the United States. So, you know, diplomatically, there's a way to get there.
Shuja, what do you make of the letter? Is this an opening?
I think so. My view is that we don't have to listen to President Trump because he changes his mind. Let's listen to President Ghani, who has said fairly clearly in the clip that you showed that we're prepared to talk to those who want to talk. I think that should be the approach. And the United States should, rather than taking this very militaristic approach of waging war, which it can't win on the ground, using much fewer forces than it ever had in Afghanistan, allow the Afghans to be part of a conversation. As Secretary Crowley said, it's critical to bring in the neighbors. China is a very critical part of this. Nobody in the United States is talking about Iran. Iran can play a role in it too. And if Iran can be turned to use its influence in the areas where it does exercise that influence, it could play a very positive role in bringing people together for conversation.
Bringing in the neighbors, the United States has been very critical of Pakistan, accusing Pakistan of giving sanctuary to the Afghan Taliban. President Trump has been very vocal in that criticism. Pakistan, for its part, has accused Afghanistan of harboring anti-Pakistan groups and of India exploiting the situation for its interests as well. So what does Pakistan do now?
Well, Pakistan needs to talk to Afghanistan. There needs to be a bilateral relationship that needs to be revived based on economics, based on connectivity, and also bring in the Chinese and increasingly the Russians into this process. The United States is a very key element in that because the US actually has backed so many other initiatives like the TAPI pipeline from Turkmenistan or the CASA 1000 project bringing electricity down from Central Asia. These are things that can bring Afghanistan and Pakistan together. And Pakistan realizes that it is now suffering from this reverse sanctuary, which the Pakistani Taliban that it cleared out of the border region have found in Kunar and Nuristan. I think that's a very powerful realization which gives the leverage to bring them to the table to talk to Afghanistan.
Ambassador, the Associated Press reports that there are two lines of communication open right now between the Afghan government and the Taliban, one being conducted by Afghanistan's national security chief, the other by its intelligence chief. But this AP report says those two people are not talking to each other, and neither are they talking to the High Peace Council, which was created to facilitate these talks. So what's going on there?
I am not sure if this report that came out very recently is totally accurate. I think that is a lot of hearsay. One thing is for sure, Afghan government officials who are tasked with such issues have for many years, even under Karzai, had occasional contacts with lower level, indirect Taliban emissaries who may meet somewhere in the Gulf region or somewhere else. Even in Europe, there have been meetings. And this is not unusual. But what we do not know is who do they really represent, as the Secretary Crowley alluded to earlier. Are they representative of the mass, of the Taliban, of the leadership, or are they just representing certain constituencies within the Taliban? So having put this aside, I think I wouldn't put too much focus on this particular issue because I don't think that it's that serious or credible. At the same time, I want to get back to this militarization of the situation. I think that what is happening is that the United States, after many years of trying different options and different recipes, has come to the realization that the onus has to be put on the ground, on the fighting, on one hand, and to make sure that that momentum we talked about earlier is reversed. On the other hand, the onus has to be put on Pakistan, who has been harboring many of these groups who support the Taliban, who are Taliban leaders. As we all know, they're all living and working from across the Durand line. So I think what we are seeing is pressure on Pakistan as well. And this is creating a new set of realignments in the region in itself. Pakistan is maybe, for example, in the next few days, put on a watch list, financial watch list of countries that are supporting terrorism. This is very serious. Pakistan, I'm sure, is very worried about this. And if that happens, then this means that Pakistan's economy is going to suffer. So this means the international community is very serious. And I think that Pakistan has to really rethink this whole issue. And that means that maybe these overtures by the Taliban could be an opening, as I said earlier.
Yeah. Shuja, pressure on Pakistan, possibly Pakistan being put on a list of countries that sponsor terrorism, that's pretty serious.
They've been on this list before, 2011 to 15, and it didn't work. But now, in advance of the meeting in Paris of this task force, the financial task force, which is going to discuss this issue, the Pakistanis have, in the last couple of days, changed some legislation, which is allowing them to ban a number of organizations that are affiliated with the Lashkar-e-Taiba and other terrorist organizations that came under UN sanctions, so that they're not allowed to operate, their assets are going to be confiscated, etc. Putting pressure on Pakistan is only part of the problem. I think this has been an issue that has bedeviled this relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and between the US and Pakistan. I mean, White House officials told me so many times over the last decade that only 10% of the attacks in Afghanistan were emanating from Pakistan. Yes, it's important that if there is sanctuary for the leadership, that it gives them that added depth and ability to function.
Right.
But most of the actual fighters are in Afghanistan now, and that's the reality. The other reality is that you can't have a military victory with the quantum of force that the US and the coalition now has. Neither can you accelerate the creation of the Afghan fighting forces and the officer class in the short period that we have.
Although the US is increasing the number of troops.
Yes, but it's to a very small number. It is close to the number that we were talking about in 2011 and
Right.
2014. So it's really back to the future, as Jim Stavridis put it. He was the NATO commander who had 150,000 troops under his control at one time. So that's really not going to work. And President Trump has given a very guarded permission to the military. He has said that he's going against his own gut instincts in allowing them to proceed along this
Right.
line. And we know how his gut works. So this may be changed in a heartbeat.
Pooja, and I'm also wondering about the timing of this letter from the Taliban, or maybe one faction of the Taliban. Later this month, we have the second meeting of what's become known as the Kabul process. This is the international peace effort, more than 20 countries involved, 3 international organizations involved. What do you expect will come out of that?
Well, ultimately, there has to be not just a solution, between the Afghan central government and the Taliban. There has to be, a regional solution. I mean, a couple of times here we've referred to this as an American war. There is an American dimension, but this is a highly complex, process. And so, what's part of the solution? Getting Pakistan on the same side of the challenge. What's another dimension of the solution? Actually, a coherent conversation between Pakistan and India, about each of their roles in the region. We've touched on Iran and Russia. In the past, they have been They've played a constructive role in Afghanistan. Now, under an American lens, they're playing a destructive role, primarily because of their own relationship that's strained between the United States, and the Trump administration and Vladimir Putin, and the Iranian regime. I think China can play a very constructive role here, because if you go back to the strategy that the late Richard Holbrooke was trying to implement in the early stages of the Obama administration, trade, was going to play a critical aspect. So to the extent that you can promote Afghans' economic ties with its neighbors as part of the One Belt, One Road initiative, that's very, very constructive and potentially, very, very helpful to this.